Welcome to LA Controversial, your inside guide to the colourful side of life in the spotlight. As one of the 4 core members of the worldwide hit sitcom Seinfeld, Michael Richards was one of the most recognisable faces on the planet throughout the 1990s. Michael starred as Seinfeld's eccentric neighbour, Cosmo Kramer. After Seinfeld, he co-wrote, produced and starred in The Michael Richards Show. Falling victim to what has since been termed the Seinfeld curse, it was cancelled after only a few weeks. But things were about to get much worse for the show's star. Returning to stand-up in November 2006, he was performing at the Laugh Factory in West Hollywood when he got into a heckling match with some latecomers and began racially abusing them. And Michael felt the full force of widespread condemnation for his outburst.
He made a comment that 50 years ago, African Americans would have been hanging from a tree with a fork stuck up their rear end. And 50 years later, we're saying to Mr. Richards that that's unacceptable hate speech and that type of rhetoric which caused many blacks to be hanged and lynched because of intolerance. And certainly it's unacceptable.
The pressure was on.
And we are calling for him to make an immediate apology, and we're giving him 24 hours to make this apology. We will have some upcoming demonstrations and protests against Mr. Richards.
In no time, Michael found himself atop TMZ.com's list of most scandalous celebrities of the year.
Number 1 is Michael Richards. I mean, when we got that video, it was one of those moments where you just said, that's it. I mean, that is just it. You hear about things like this, but to actually see it, to see somebody do it, not just do it, but do it, in a performance in front of a crowd, was really remarkable, troubling and remarkable.
He claimed that anger was the culprit and that he isn't inherently racist, appearing on talk shows and with the likes of Jesse Jackson to apologize for his behavior.
I'm sorry. I'm very, very sorry to the African American community for the upset. And as a performance artist, in the course of what comes through in the motion of my work, I can say that I'm happy this has all come about because it's out in the open, and I've been a conduit to something that I think is quite meaningful, and the work begins outside and the work begins inside. Bless you.
He claimed he had tried to defuse the heckling by being outrageous. In July 2007, however, Michael announced he had retired from stand-up comedy in order to spiritually heal and to travel to Cambodia with his fiancée, Beth Skip. While fans and reporters were falling over themselves to get to Robert Pattinson at premieres of the teen blockbuster Twilight, all they wanted to know from his female co-star was,
what's it like kissing vampires? That's basically the main question.
And your answer?
Don't have one.
Despite playing the film's leading character, Kristen Stewart barely registered on reporters' radar until rumours began circulating that the former child actor knew all about kissing her co-star, both on and off the screen. Certainly, there was no shortage of sparks flying between them in the film, and journalists wanted to know how they managed to maintain the sexual tension.
Yeah, sometimes I like to play my own trumpet to keep up sexual tension.
Although insisting that they were just good friends, their appearance at the MTV Movie Awards to collect the honour for Best Kiss had gossip columnists rubbing their hands with glee, especially as Kristen's boyfriend of 4 years, Michael Angarano, was nowhere to be seen. All the gossip only served to boost interest in the brooding young actress, who was about to give another leg up to her bad girl image by playing real-life rocker Joan Jett in the biopic Runaways. Kristen's performance in the film stirred extra buzz thanks to a scene in which her character makes out with bandmate Cherie Curry. played by Dakota Fanning.
I still haven't really thought about it. It was just kind of another thing that was in the... No. Just another thing that was in the story, you know.
I mean, they were like, Jonah and Sheree, I mean, like we've said a million times, have such a unique bond. The fact that they made out when they got sort of crazy back in the day, like, it really has nothing, it makes it sort of an interesting... Of course, people are going to want to know about stuff like that, but what's really more interesting is, like, how much they love each other in a weird way. It's not like it's not really a romantic relationship. It's a friendship.
In July 2009, she raised eyebrows again after Australian tabloid New Weekly claimed that Kristen had been spotted buying a pregnancy test. Kristen laughed off the rumours, labelling them ridiculous. It's hard to imagine manic comedian Robin Williams ever being shy. But in fact, he led a very lonely childhood and found it difficult to make friends. Much of his early life was spent moving around because of his father's work, and he didn't overcome his shyness until joining his high school drama department, where his knack for entertaining people won him popularity among his peers. Despite his amazing ability to put a smile on other people's faces, Robin's hyperactivity and manic delivery have sparked plenty of speculation that he suffers from bipolar disorder. He's also generated plenty of controversy off the back of his well-publicized battles with substance abuse, which came to a head in the late 70s and early 80s. Robin was once quoted as saying, "Cocaine is God's way of telling you you're making too much money." He reportedly managed to kick the drink and drugs after good friend John Belushi died from an overdose in 1982. But 20 years later, he'd found himself slipping back into bad habits. And in August 2006, he finally checked himself into rehab to deal with the drinking that had once again got out of control. Going public with his admission of addiction felt like a major breakthrough.
Not even a setback. I think it's a move forward. You know, it's like the idea of, you know, going away was a good idea, and now I feel I'm back on track, which is great. And the idea that I'm not alone, that helps even more. First 20 years I did it alone, and then when I went back out again, it was like, whoa, wait a minute, and now I'm back going, there's others. I'm all right.
He finished the program in time to promote his film Man of the Year. And although he had no illusions about the challenges ahead, he was really touched by the public support.
I'm doing great. I want to thank the millions and the thousands and even the people who just have come up in person and thank them for all the support. It's been lovely. It's been wonderful to know I'm not alone. And that's the main thing. When you come out of rehab, if you know that, then you got a big shot.
After more than 30 years of living with addiction, he finally felt in control of his life.
Wonderful. Since rehab, I don't drink, and it's a lot nicer because I can remember things. And that's just nice. It's really lovely to be out there and meet such honest people.
Early in 2010, after undergoing heart surgery to replace an aortic valve, Robin proved he was back on wisecracking form on a trip to Australia, during which he referred to the locals as basically English rednecks. While ordinary Australians appeared to see the funny side, he'd clearly offended then Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who suggested Robin should spend more time in Alabama. It's often said that there is a thin line between genius and madness. And in the case of brilliant pop producer Phil Spector, even he has described himself as relatively insane. He was the man who invented the famous wall of sound in the 60s and was behind such hits as You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin', John Lennon's Imagine, and the Beatles' Let It Be album. He produced the Ronettes, the Crystals, and worked with the Ramones and Leonard Cohen. Along the way, he also made a name for himself for allegedly discharging firearms in the recording studio and brandishing guns at Leonard Cohen and the Ramones. According to his ex-wife, Ronnie Spector, he was violently possessive and once showed her a coffin that he was keeping for her if she ever dared to leave him. Finally, in February 2003, he was arrested for murdering a woman at his Californian mansion.
The officers arrived at the scene and discovered a female had been shot inside the location. The victim was pronounced dead. Mr. Phil Spector from Motown Records has been arrested and booked for murder.
Spector claimed that Lana Clarkson, a 40-year-old hostess and actress, had accidentally committed suicide. But he was sent to trial after allegedly telling his chauffeur on the night of Clarkson's death, "I think I killed somebody." For the next few years, he remained free on a $1 million bail. While on bail, he met and married aspiring young actress Rochelle Short. In the lead-up to his trial in April 2007, Phil sat in on the selection of the jury.
Mr. Spector was in court, and he sat through the whole process, looked very interested. He has a new, rather subdued look of attire. He wore a long black coat with tan slacks and a tan shirt, and he had a new hairdo, which everybody has noticed.
Looking wild-eyed and haunted, he didn't have anything nice to say about his prosecutors.
The actions of the Hitler-like district attorney and his stormtrooping henchmen.
At his televised trial, Alan Jackson put the case for the prosecution to the jury.
Philip Spector stepped out on that porch. He had a gun in his hand, a pistol in his right hand, and it was 90 degrees. His arm was bent 90 degrees parallel to the ground. He had blood running between his fingers. Adriano de Souza remembers seeing something that he believes was blood running between his fingers. Spector looked at him square in the eye, didn't say another word, and he confessed, "I think I killed somebody."
Meanwhile, the Spector camp insisted the former producer was innocent.
The evidence will show this was a tragic accident, and that it's a sad thing for any jury to see photographs that you saw. And the evidence will also show that back on February 3 of 2003, before they even had a cause of death, let alone a manner of death, they had murder on their mind. Murder on their mind. The police.
In August, the jury were taken to the defendant's house to inspect the scene of the crime.
The bureau where the gun supposedly was still there with the drawer open, just as it was. There were pictures on the bureau, the death pictures of Lana Clarkson, the very bloody pictures of her sitting slumped in the chair. There were several views of that. And everything was pretty much as we have seen it in the trial, except that you got more of an idea of the size and dimensions of things.
The following month, with both sides resting their case, the jury was asked to consider both sides of the story and come up with a verdict. After days of deliberation, they still couldn't decide whether or not Phil was guilty of second-degree murder.
It sounds like they are in conflict. We have a 7-5 split. That's a pretty deep division. And whether they could now give them instructions that would make them change their minds, and that all 12 of them could suddenly come to an agreement on something, it's hard to imagine, but everything is possible in this case.
With the pressure on to declare a mistrial, Judge Fiedler did his best to find a way out. But finally, he had no choice but to call the whole thing off.
At this time, I will find that the jury is unable to arrive at a verdict and declare a mistrial in this matter.
The retrial was set for the following year in October, with Judge Fiedler presiding again. This time, there would be no television cameras. In the trial, Phil Spector's new defense attorney told a jury in closing arguments that scientific evidence proved Lana Clarkson pulled the trigger of the gun herself and listed 14 points of forensic evidence, including blood spatter, gunshot residue, and DNA, which he said were proof of a self-inflicted wound. But Alan Jackson was unimpressed with the defense's evidence.
Lana Clarkson did not hold this gun. She could not have held the gun. She could not have shot herself. It simply can't work. The physics don't allow it. On top of everything else. On top of the fact that the man seated to my right walked out within minutes of the gunshot going off and confessed, I killed her.
That was enough for the jury, who had also heard testimony from several women who claimed that Spector had lured them to his house and plied them with alcohol, and when they wanted to leave, had pulled a gun on them.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Philip Spector, guilty of the crime of second-degree murder of Lana Clarkson in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony, as charged in count 1 of the indictment.
Almost 6 years after Lana Clarkson was found dead in his home, Phil Spector was sentenced to 15 years to life on his conviction for second-degree murder. He was given another 4 years for personal use of a firearm. While the prosecution was satisfied with the outcome, Spector's young wife was still protesting his innocence.
He was tried on his character, and they made him into a monster, and he is the most kind and gentle and giving and wonderful man that I've ever met in my entire life, and he would do anything for anyone, and this is just absolutely absurd. It's unfair, and I want to get the truth out there as opposed to the verdict.
Her husband is currently serving his sentence at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison in Corcoran. He will be 88 years old before he becomes eligible for parole. Before Robert Downey took on the role of Arthur Conan Doyle's controversial hero in 2009, the name Sherlock Holmes was almost synonymous with that of a certain famous British actor. Basil Rathbone first played the part of the morphine-abusing detective in two 1939 movies, The Hound of the Baskervilles and The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Prior to playing Sherlock Holmes, the rather austere-looking actor had made a name for himself depicting cold-hearted villains, like Guy of Gisborne opposite Errol Flynn's Robin Hood, or Karenin opposite Greta Garbo's Anna Karenina. It's no wonder that when he was offered the role of Holmes, he jumped at it, saying, "For once I get to beat the bad guy instead of play him." And yet, there was a downside to his success. After becoming so closely identified with his on-screen alter ego, he found himself eternally typecast and was quoted as saying, "When you become the character you portray, it's the end of your career as an actor." He later suggested it was his association with Sherlock Holmes that lost him a pivotal role in The Picture of Dorian Gray in 1945. In his later career, he was reduced to taking work of increasingly inferior quality, including 10 films during the 1960s that he admitted were only done for the money. And Basil's infamous lifestyle demanded a lot of it. While deeply attached to his second wife, Ouida, Basil quickly found that she had an insatiable taste for the finer things in life, and the pair of them quickly established a reputation for hosting extravagant and expensive parties, attended by the biggest stars in Hollywood. It was Ouida's talent for spending his money as fast as he could make it that prevented him from ever retiring. Poor Basil worked constantly, right up until his death in 1967 from a heart attack. If 50 Cent looks like someone you wouldn't want to bump into in a dark alley, that's because he grew up fending for himself in Queens, one of the toughest neighborhoods in New York City. At the age of 23, his cocaine-dealing mother was murdered, leaving 8-year-old Curtis Jackson III to the care of his grandparents. By the time he was 12, he was carrying a gun and dealing drugs.
I always had to maintain being two different people because I had to be my grandmama's baby when I come in the house, and then I got to do what I got to do to get by in the street.
In 1994, he spent 6 months in a shock incarceration boot camp after being found in possession of heroin, cocaine, and a starter gun. When he got out of jail, he started rising through the ranks of rap. But just as he was about to sign a publishing deal with Columbia, he was attacked by a gunman outside his grandmother's house and shot 9 times with a 9mm handgun at close range. It took him 5 months to walk again properly, by which time he had lost his publishing deal, as well as being blacklisted for being involved in gangland warfare. Unable to record in the US, he was forced to travel to Canada, where he recorded over 30 songs that helped build his reputation and popularity. But despite declaring that the violence of his past was behind him, 50 Cent continued to court controversy with his high-profile feuds. As well as falling out with P. Diddy, he also paid out on Nas and Fat Joe. But one of his biggest spats has been with former protege, The Game, which reportedly came to a head when a member of The Game's entourage was shot outside the radio station where 50 Cent was doing an interview. However, in an effort to prove he was turning over a new leaf, 50 kissed and made up with The Game, and the pair went Dutch on a $250,000 check for charity.
We're here today to show that people can rise above even the most difficult circumstances, and together we can put negativity behind us. A lot of people don't want to see it happen, but we're responding to the 2 most important groups, and that's ourselves and our fans.
Since then, 50's professional feuds seem to have taken a more peaceful turn. On the subject of his rash promise to retire if Kanye West's album Graduation sold more copies than his own release Curtis, the gangster rapper explained it was all about publicity.
See, I know how to get it going, don't I? I tell you I'm gonna quit music, then everybody wants to ask me questions. This guy's he hasn't sold a fraction of the material I sold. We out here, y'all know that. Y'all don't need me to tell you that. You know what I mean? But this is how you get it going. This is great publicity, man. I could have spent $10 million more and not achieved what I achieved with that. This is great.
On a personal level, however, it seemed he was still having a few problems keeping things nice. In 2008, the court ordered him to stay away from the mother of his son Marquise after allegedly attempting to firebomb their home. The fur flew in the battle for visitation rights.
If you follow the trial or the history of the relationship, I've never said anything about it up until now. Mr. Jackson has always spoken negative about me.
With his ex gunning for him in the courts, 50 decided it was finally time for him to take the moral high ground by suing Taco Bell for sending out a fake letter asking 50 Cent to change his name for one day to 79 cent, 89 cent or 99 cent to help publicize its value menu. He won the lawsuit. He proved his talent for getting things going in the media again in 2010, after losing an incredible 54 pounds for his role in the film Things Fall Apart, about a college football player who was diagnosed with cancer.